You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, March 11th, 2022.
6.
Welcome to this week's Procurement 6. This week's Procurement 6 is proudly sponsored by Zip Intake to Procure. Zip is the world's leading intake to procure solution, one place for employees to initiate a purchase or vendor request. We're also delighted to be partnering with Zip on a research paper on the all-important topic of employee experience during the intake to procure process. Now their experience during the process often defines their perception of the role of procurement as either a bureaucratic gatekeeper or an enabler of business strategy. So tell us what you think. Does employee experience really matter to procurement? Head on over to artofprocurement.com/experience survey to give us your thoughts.
5.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine, the whole world has watched unbelievable scenes unfolding before our eyes in what some people are calling the first TikTok war. While it is hard to shake feelings of helplessness, procurement and supply chain skills are critically important for securing and moving the goods that the Ukrainian people require right now. This week, Sameli Samalkorpi joined Philip Eidson to talk about Procure for Peace, the brand new resource for anyone who wants to help.
Let me start by telling a story. Last weekend, I realized that through my connections in Finnish procurement, supply chain, logistics network, I was able to quite quickly help the Ukrainians in Finland to establish a logistics corridor from Finland to Poland and further to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And upon reflection on that, I realized that procurement is actually super well positioned to help Ukraine right now. And the reason being that there's a lot of, let's say, donation money going into Ukraine right now, so the money is not an issue.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, a lot of needs in Ukraine for different kind of medical supplies and so forth. But the challenge is that the Ukrainians don't have the time; they have war to fight, and also quite often there's a lot of, let's say, spontaneous NGO organizations in Ukraine that don't have the time, they don't have the procurement expertise, but they have the money and the need.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, there's a large number of global procurement people who have kind of capabilities, who have more time than Ukrainians, and who are really willing and keen to help. So that's the whole idea behind the Procure for Peace, is that we try to kind of connect the Ukrainians who have the needs and knowledge of the local situation with the global procurement community that's willing to help,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to create a community and a platform and solution and resources that can basically combine and connect, bridge the Ukrainians and global procurement community.
You can catch Phil's full interview with Sameli on Art of Procurement, and you can learn more about Procure for, the number 4, procureforpeace.org.
4.
The whole Art of Procurement team spent this past week running Digital Outcomes, our newest live virtual event format. The focus was divided evenly between the benefits of digital and the ability of technology to help procurement deliver meaningful business outcomes. Now, each day had a theme, and if I had to pick a key takeaway from each of the 3 days, they would be: Day 1, strategy. Keith Hausman from Globality talked about legacy systems and purposes versus modern technology and purposes. There is nothing inherently wrong with a legacy system as long as the purpose of that system is to meet a legacy purpose. And if procurement's supposedly modern objectives keep leading us back to legacy-style systems, then we really need to ask ourselves some tough questions instead of placing all the blame on the systems we implement. Day 2, speed. There is sustained speed and then speed off the line, and it was the second that I heard loud and clear on day 2. Johan Raunig from McKinsey talked about procurement needing to make one key decision. Are you all in, or do you outsource? He advocated for an all-in mentality, but that is a decision each organization has to make for themselves. It is hard to imagine being capable of speed, though, if you can't be decisive about foundational questions like that. And day 3, scale. While procurement teams tend to be smaller than we would all like, there is a lot of work to do. As I learned in my conversation with Gary Levitan from WeWork and Remco Van Hoek from the University of Arkansas, procurement has to be prepared to avail ourselves of every approach as circumstances dictate. That might mean RPA, outsourcing, new technologies, but if we are strategically opportunistic about how we combine them, we will never be boring.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
This week I wrote a brief blog post about another upcoming event, the 2022 Supply Chain and Procurement Awards. Art of Procurement is proud to be partnering with the teams at Supply Chain Now and Buyers Meeting Point to host the awards. At a live virtual event on May 18th, we will gather together as a global community to hear success stories and recognize the global excellence of our colleagues. There are 9 awards being presented this year, and yes, self-nominations are welcome. Maybe you know of an unsung hero that needs some recognition, or a leader that makes a difference with deeds rather than words. We're also looking for champions of humanity, technology trailblazers, and more. All nominations must be received by April 1st so that our executive judges can review them and make their final decisions. Please save the date to join us on May 18th and consider nominating your team or a colleague for one of the many awards categories. We will also be joined on the 18th by Tim Nelson, CEO of Hope for Justice, a global nonprofit organization which aims to end human trafficking and modern slavery. And they are also our philanthropy partner for the awards. I had the opportunity to interview him a few weeks ago, and he is absolutely amazing, both in his commitment to the cause and also his ability to help professionals understand the impact they can have on people they will never meet. Don't miss the opportunity to see him speak live. For more information on the awards, you can contact me directly or visit supplychainprocurementawards.com.
2.
In other news, we're all fixated on the cost of final mile logistics right now due to a combination of fuel prices going up and labor shortages driving up wages. But the cost of logistics is increasing back further in the supply chain as well. As recently reported in the Wall Street Journal, the next threat to consumer prices is expected to be container ship costs. Those contracts are negotiated yearly, and projections are that the average rate is expected to increase from $5,500 last year per container to between $7,000 and $8,000 per 40-foot box this year. Most retailers have been allowing their added costs to eat into margins, but that can't go on forever without them eventually raising prices on consumers. Toymaker Hasbro had already planned to raise prices in the second quarter due to logistic costs, but that plan was in place before these new extreme shipping container rates were determined. Procurement professionals will be familiar with a few of the dynamics pushing these rates up. First of all is market concentration among providers. The top 5 companies represent about 3/4 of shipping container capacity worldwide. This means that there are very few alternatives, and procurement is unlikely to have much negotiating leverage when it comes to those annual contracts. As with other transportation categories, there is also a spot market for container capacity, and we would naturally expect that to be more expensive. However, the surge there has been incredible too. This past year, some shippers paid up to $20,000 per container in the spot market, 4 times the annual average for contracted container capacity. And while that market has settled down a bit to about $16,000, it is still extremely high. This information is most likely to affect us as consumers, but it will also absolutely creep into our work as procurement professionals. Knowing how our suppliers ship their goods and finding out how effectively they are able to manage their freight costs, regardless of the channel, will give us the insight we need to have informed conversations about cost and price and ensure that we don't pay any more for any longer than is absolutely necessary.
1.
On April 12th, we will be joined by longtime Art of Procurement friends Joe Payne and Jennifer Ulrich from Corecentric for an AOP Live session titled The 3 Problems That Will Make Your P2P Implementation Fail. I'm sure you would love to know right now what those 3 problems are. But for that, you're going to have to visit the registration link on today's episode page or go to artofprocurement.com and check out our upcoming digital events. What I can tell you right now is that Joe and Jennifer have seen more procurement transformations than they'd probably like to admit. And all of the roadblocks stem from these 3 problems. The solution to the problems is a heavy dose of change management, always a challenge for procurement. Jennifer and Joe will answer live audience questions about why companies continue to struggle with their P2P implementations, the forms of ROI that C-level leaders beyond procurement expect to see from P2P, as well as how procurement can deliver them, and finally, the specific investments in change management that can increase both the likelihood of P2P implementation success and also increased ROI. To make sure you don't miss out, register today and you will be prompted to submit your questions either in advance of the event or live on the day of. I'll be hosting this event with Helen McKenzie serving as the voice of the audience. Just go to artofprocurement.com/calendar to find out more. And you can also find all of the links associated with the stories mentioned today at the show notes page for this episode at artofprocurement.com/podcast.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.